It was a quiet evening at the company's headquarters. The office lights on the top floors glowed much later than usual. Down at the lobby, the security guard sat at his desk, carefully watching the cameras. He had worked there for years, long enough to know the usual routine of the building. He knew when the last employees left, when the cleaning crew arrived, and which executives often stayed late. But this week, something felt different. Almost every night, he noticed certain senior staff going into offices with stacks of folders and shutting the doors behind them. Sometimes, men in expensive suits came in long after midnight. Men he didn't recognize. They signed no logbook, they avoided eye contact, and they moved quickly as if they didn't want anyone to notice them. The guard couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. One evening, after watching the same group of executives hurry into the restricted floor, he decided to raise his concern. When the boss finally came down to leave for the night, the guard stepped forward politely. "Sir," he said carefully, "I think something unusual is going on upstairs. People are working odd hours and strangers are coming in without clearance. Maybe we should check it out." The boss stopped, looked at him, and suddenly let out a laugh. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the sort of laugh that made the guard feel small. "Listen," the boss said, brushing him off. "You're here to watch the doors, not to worry about what my team does. Do you really think a security guard understands corporate affairs? Don't waste my time." The guard nodded quietly, but inside he felt a sting. He wasn't trying to play detective. He was just doing his job, trying to protect the company. But the way the boss dismissed him made it clear. His warning wasn't taken seriously. Over the next few days, the same strange activity continued. Executives carried boxes out late at night, sometimes covering them with coats as if to hide the contents. The guard's gut feeling grew stronger, but he remembered the boss's mocking tone. He didn't want to risk his job by speaking up again. Still, the unease wouldn't leave him. He found himself watching the cameras more closely, paying attention to every little movement. The cleaning staff whispered among themselves too, noticing the same late-night visitors and the growing tension in the building. Something was happening, and everyone could sense it, even if no one dared to say it out loud. One night, as he sat in his chair staring at the monitors, the guard thought about the boss's laugh. He realized something important. People who laugh at warnings often have the most to hide. The following week, the tension in the office grew thicker. The guard kept noticing small things that didn't add up. The accounting staff, who usually joked and chatted while leaving for the day, now walked out quietly with worried looks on their faces. Some carried files close to their chest, as if they didn't want anyone to see. Others looked over their shoulders before stepping into the elevator, as though someone might be watching. Rumors began to spread. A few employees whispered near the coffee machine about sudden budget cuts. Teams were told to delay projects because funds were being reorganized. At the same time, the executives at the top seemed to live more extravagantly than ever. Luxury cars lined the private parking area, and new designer suits were flaunted daily in the hallways. The guard noticed how unusual this was. The company had always been wealthy, but now the difference between the staff and the top bosses was sharper than ever. While regular employees worried about salaries and job cuts, the higher-ups seemed to be spending without a care in the world. What bothered him even more was the silence. People clearly saw what was happening, but no one dared to ask questions. The company culture had changed. Speaking out felt dangerous. The guard had already experienced what happened when he raised a concern. He was laughed at, belittled. Others likely feared the same treatment, or worse, losing their jobs. Late one evening, as the guard made his usual rounds, he caught sight of an executive slipping into the archives room. The man carried a large briefcase and glanced around nervously before shutting the door behind him. Hours later, when the man left, the briefcase looked strangely heavier. The guard's instincts told him something important had just been taken out, but again he held back. Meanwhile, the cleaning staff started to talk more openly among themselves. They complained about having to work around locked offices, about picking up shredded paper from overflowing bins, about being told to stay out of certain areas. One janitor even joked they must be hiding gold up there. But everyone knew it wasn't a joke. The guard felt torn. He was hired to protect the building and the people in it, but now he was watching something much bigger unfold, something that could affect not just the company, but everyone who depended on it. He thought back to the boss's laughter, that smug look of superiority. The memory burned in his mind. He began to wonder, what if his instincts were right? What if ignoring these red flags led to something far worse than just late-night office visits? One night, near closing time, the guard noticed something unusual. The office floor that was usually quiet after hours had a door left slightly open. At first, he thought it was just a mistake, someone leaving in a hurry. But when he peeked in, the room looked different. Papers were scattered across a desk, a folder half open, as if someone had rushed out quickly. He stepped closer, his eyes landing on a stack of documents left unattended. He knew he wasn't supposed to touch anything, but something pulled him in. The first page caught his attention immediately. It was filled with numbers, accounts, and transfers. What stood out was how the same sums were being repeated, almost duplicated, across different accounts. He frowned. Even though he wasn't an accountant, he knew enough to sense that something didn't add up. Curiosity pushed him further. He glanced at another page, and his heart skipped a beat. There were references to overseas accounts, names of companies he had never heard of, and large amounts of money being moved around, amounts that were hard to even imagine. Millions. He froze, realizing he had stumbled onto something important. The pieces of the puzzle he had been noticing for weeks, late-night visitors, executives carrying boxes, whispers among employees. All of it suddenly made sense. These weren't harmless late shifts. Something far bigger was happening behind those locked doors. The guard carefully placed the papers back exactly as he found them. He didn't want anyone to know he had seen them. As he walked back to his desk, his mind raced. What he had just discovered was dangerous. If the wrong person knew he had seen those files, he could be in serious trouble. That night, he couldn't sleep. The images of those papers kept flashing in his mind. Offshore accounts, duplicate numbers, missing funds. It was as if the company was running two lives, one for the public and one in the shadows. The next day, he went to work with a heavy heart. He tried to act normal, greeting employees, checking the cameras, and doing his rounds. But inside, he carried a secret that no one else knew. He wanted to tell someone, but who would believe a security guard when the boss himself had laughed at him? Still, one thought kept repeating in his head. He had seen the truth. And once you see the truth, it's impossible to unsee it. For days, the guard struggled with what he had seen. Every time he looked at the executives walking confidently through the lobby, his mind went back to those papers, offshore accounts, duplicated transactions, and sums of money that no ordinary person could imagine. He felt the weight of a decision pressing on him. Should he stay silent and protect his job, or should he speak up and risk everything? The memory of the boss laughing in his face still stung. He knew going back to him was useless. If he tried again, he would be mocked, maybe even fired. But deep down, he also knew that what he had discovered was too big to ignore. Millions of dollars were being moved secretly. And if he could see the signs sooner or later, the world would see them too. One night, after his shift, the guard sat alone at his kitchen table. He opened his phone and searched for ways to report suspicious financial activity. His fingers trembled as he read about whistleblower hotlines, financial regulators, and investigators who handled corporate fraud. For the first time, he thought about reaching outside the walls of the company. The next evening, he took the boldest step of his life. Using a public phone far from the office, he called a number for financial crime investigators. He didn't give his name. Instead, he described what he had seen, the strange visitors, the boxes of files, and most importantly, the documents with duplicate accounts and offshore transfers. His voice was shaky, but he spoke with conviction. The investigator on the other end listened carefully. Unlike the boss, this person didn't laugh. They asked questions, pressing for details. The guard answered as best as he could, sharing everything he had noticed without revealing who he was. Before hanging up, the investigator reassured him, "You did the right thing. We'll look into it." From that night onward, things began to change, quietly at first. unknown to the company, regulators started keeping an eye on their financial movements. Forensic accountants began tracing the numbers, matching them with the guard's description. Each trail led closer to the truth, and the picture of a massive fraud scheme began to take shape. The guard went to work every day as usual, sitting at his desk, checking cameras, greeting employees. No one suspected that behind his calm face, he had taken a risk that could bring down the entire empire. For now, his identity was safe. But he knew it was only a matter of time before the storm arrived. It started on a Monday morning. The building felt unusually tense, though no one quite knew why. The guard noticed a group of unfamiliar people in sharp suits entering through the front doors, carrying briefcases and showing official badges. They weren't visitors or clients. They were investigators. They moved quickly, heading straight for the executive offices. Within minutes, more officials poured in. Computers were unplugged, boxes of files were carried out, and staff were asked to step aside. The quiet halls of the company, once filled with confidence and power, now echoed with the sound of doors opening, drawers slamming, and the steady shuffle of papers being seized. News spread like wildfire. By noon, every employee knew something serious was happening. Phones buzzed with messages. The company is under investigation. They're saying it's about fraud. Faces that usually held calm and control now carried panic. The same executives who used to walk with pride now looked pale, whispering to each other and avoiding eye contact. The guard watched all of this from his usual post, but inside, his heart raced. This was the moment he had sensed for weeks. The truth was finally out. Later that day, the media arrived. Cameras lined the streets, reporters shouted questions, and the company's name filled the headlines. The story broke wide open. A $50 million fraud scandal had been uncovered. The investigation revealed that company leaders had been moving money through false accounts, funneling it into offshore banks, and using the firm's reputation as a shield. Investors were deceived, employees were left in shock, and the world saw the truth the guard had noticed long before anyone else. The boss, the same man who once laughed in his face, was now escorted out of the building by authorities. The sight was surreal. Gone was the arrogant smile. Gone was the dismissive tone. In its place was a man hiding his face from flashing cameras, surrounded by officers, his career and reputation crumbling in front of everyone. For the employees watching from the lobby windows, it felt unreal. The powerful figure they once feared was now powerless. The guard, standing quietly at his desk, remembered the night when his warning had been mocked. That laugh had turned into silence now, drowned out by the sound of the scandal echoing across the city. In the weeks that followed, the company became the center of nonstop attention. Every newspaper headline carried the story of a fraud. Every television channel discussed how such a massive scheme had been hidden for so long. The figure that kept repeating was shocking. $50 million gone through fake accounts and secret transfers. The executives were formally charged. Courtrooms filled with reporters, employees, and investors who had lost everything. The boss, once untouchable, now sat behind a table in front of judges, looking small and defeated. The same man who had mocked warnings, who had lived in luxury while others struggled, now faced years of prison and the shame of a ruined legacy. For the employees who remained, it was bittersweet. Many lost their jobs as the company collapsed, but they also felt a strange sense of justice. The truth had finally surfaced. The empire built on lies had crumbled, and those responsible could no longer hide. As for the security guard, life slowly returned to normal, though he would never be the same again. He still came to work in his uniform, greeting people with his quiet smile, but behind that calmness was a man who had carried a heavy truth. Eventually, the investigators learned about the anonymous tip that had started everything. While his name never appeared in the newspapers, the people who mattered most knew he had played a role. One evening, as he finished his shift, a younger employee approached him. "I heard it was someone inside who spoke up," she said softly. "If that person hadn't done it, we might still be in the dark. Whoever they are, they saved us." The guard didn't respond with details. He only nodded and smiled. Deep inside, He felt a quiet pride. He hadn't done it for recognition. He hadn't done it to prove the boss wrong. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. The story of the fraud became a cautionary tale told for years about greed, arrogance, and the danger of ignoring warnings. But hidden within that story was also a lesson in courage. Sometimes the most important truths don't come from the top floors of a building, but from the people quietly watching, paying attention, and refusing to ignore what doesn't feel right. The guard may have been laughed at once, but in the end, it was his warning that stood true. The empire had fallen, justice had been served, and his quiet courage had made all the difference.